So now we're going to move into our next presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tete Brooks.
All right. Hey, y'all. I want to be in the audience too. I'm here just enjoying, just listening to Alicia and just all the previous presenters. Thank you all so much, so much for being here. I have the privilege and the honor of introducing one of my sheroes to y'all. You probably already know who she is, but I have the honor of doing that today. So I think Lariah put something in the chat earlier during Alicia's presentation that Silent Springs paper, she remembers her first time reading that paper, and it also had such an impact on her career. And if I remember correctly, Dr. Tamara James Todd, who is the next speaker, that was a part of your dissertation project, correct? The different products that they use. So, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we are in the presence of greatness, ladies and gentlemen, or ladies. So Dr. Tamara James Todd, she has all of her acronyms on the screen for you all. So I will let you all read and digest it for yourself. But similar to Lariah's sentiments about the work that Dr. James Todd has done in the past has really set the stage for a number of us early stage investigators to step on. And for those of you that are Beyonce fans, for those of you that are Simone Biles fans, insert whoever you admire for a period of time that is extremely the GOAT, the greatest of all times, and you can insert Dr. Tamara James Todd there for me. So again, I believe in giving people their flowers in public as well as in private. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you for setting the stage for us to step on. Without you working your dissertation in this beauty justice space that is now called the beauty justice space, you were doing this work before it had a name. All right. So I just want to say thank you so much for your kindness. It's been 3 years since we have been hosting these community symposiums, and every single year I've asked you to present and you've said yes. That means so much to me in so many ways. So I just want to say thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your presence in the space. Thank you for serving as an example to little Black girls like me that can look up and say, even though there are only 4% of Black women that are in academia, you are doing something that I can aspire to do. So it is my honor and privilege to have you close out our day one. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Tamara James Todd for her presentation on the journey to beauty justice, neighborhood level differences in hair product safety.
Oh my, you're going to make me cry today. Thank you so much for having me. And it is an honor to continue to be invited to participate in this event. It is always a privilege and a pleasure to do so. So thank you so much. And I was asked to share a little bit about my journey as a part of sharing the science with folks today. And and you'll see in this presentation that in addition to sharing a little bit about my story of how did I start doing this research even before it had an official title of beauty justice, I'm really sharing some of the data that comes from one of the amazing doctoral students that is in my lab who cannot be here today because she's getting ready to defend her dissertation. But without further ado, you'll see her name in just a second. A little bit about me and why I do this work. Next slide, please. So I am from Kansas City, Missouri, and I grew up in a community that was somewhat segregated. So I lived in a Black neighborhood that was surrounded by a white community, went to a predominantly white high school. And when you are, one of a few, you notice things a bit more. So some of the things that I noticed as a young girl, particularly in elementary school, is that many of my neighborhood friends and myself were developing much faster, much earlier than other girls that went to the same school as us. In other words, Black girls were, developing breasts and so on much earlier. And that had social implications. I don't know if anybody remembers, but people can get teased for, minor things. And in this case, many of us were really heavily teased, and it's quite memorable as you enter elementary school, high school, being in those circumstances, and not really knowing why. When I moved to Boston to do my master's degree at first, and attended Boston University, I was intrigued by a class in environmental health that spoke to an issue of Time magazine that had also hit the shelves back in October of 2000 when I first, was the fall of when I moved up here, that had this particular image on the cover of the magazine article. And, again, to give kudos where kudos is due, I had the privilege of being in the class of Dr. Nancy Maxwell, who was teaching on a study that she had done as a part of Silent Spring Institute. So again, kudos to an amazing organization that has continued to do phenomenal work. But she, as a teacher, she was talking about different types of products, consumer products that I was completely unaware of as potentially containing harmful chemicals and other things in products. And so I made a connection in my mind as a master's student working in the lab of Dr. Tim Lash to earn money in Boston, which is quite expensive to live in, to really want to understand and make it so that other girls, young girls, didn't have to go through what me and my friends had to go through, to really try to figure out what were some of the drivers of early puberty. And, of course, this being linked, particularly the earlier onset of age at menarche being linked to breast cancer risk. So I was really concerned about this, and that's a part of the story. Next slide, please. So around the same time, this article had been published by the Pediatric Research in Office Settings Network. It utilized data from the early 1990s to show differences in age at menarche, or when a girl starts her period, between Black and white girls. And so you can see here by age 12, about 35% of white girls had started their periods compared to 62% of Black girls. Now, it wasn't always the case that this existed. In fact, if you look earlier in time, meaning even back to the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, you actually see the complete opposite of this. And yet, article after article that wrote about this was quite a topic of interest in the scientific community at the time. But each article would, specify things such as, it's genetic differences. It's due to some sort of underlying biological difference between Black and white girls. And of course, we all on this call and increasingly folks have become aware of that race is a social construct. So that's not what was driving this. And certainly genetics just simply doesn't change that fast, even if we were thinking about that. But I really was interested in what were the social factors, questions that folks weren't really asking, particularly the environmental factors. And that really, as Dr. Tate Brooks mentioned, was the premise behind my dissertation work that I completed at Columbia University. Next slide, please. I want to note, and I'm sorry that this slide, I created these slides on a Mac, so it's the title's being covered, but I want to note that I mentioned that data came from the early 1990s. And so recently, a colleague of mine, Dr. Zifan Wang and Dr. Shruti Maligaya, have been working on the Apple Women's Health Study. And this question kind of resurfaced around mean age at menarche and whether or not there have been declines still, again, connected to breast cancer risk. And you can see that these these declines in age-at menarche have continued. They've plateaued to some degree, but you can see that the most kind of striking difference or decline is the non-Hispanic Black population. Next slide, please. So this is looking back at what Dr. Nancy Maxwell, when I was a master's student, presented in that class in environmental health, which essentially was an ecologic study. She was looking at advertisements of hair care products and what was being targeted to different groups of people. It's worth noting that even today, even though this particular advertisement and what she was looking at was kind of over the course of time up until the kind of late 20th century, you can go into our local, drug and pharmacy stores and still, even beauty supply stores and still find 𝗥𝗲𝘀𝗲𝗿𝗀𝘀 placenta. And so this, often is something that folks may use to grow their hair longer, thicker, fuller. It's sheep and cow placenta. But this was that aha moment for me where, while I personally have not used this product, and thinking about all the different products that are marketed to us, what exactly is in them may be problematic. Next slide, please. So I founded the Greater New York Hair Product Study back in 2004 to understand what the patterns of hair product use were and what was in the products that we were using. This was a mixed methods study where I collected information on, what people were using, how they were using this, and all of that. And for some of you all, you've heard this somewhat. You heard me talk a little bit about this study. I just wanted to highlight this particular slide to show that there are differences by race, ethnicity, and this should be no surprise to many of us on this call. Because I was doing the study in the New York area, I could look at the heterogeneity within the Black community and note some differences. And it is worth noting that the Hispanic population is predominantly Dominican and identified as being of Black race as well. So we see differences, and we also, next slide, please, wanted to answer that question about whether or not hair product use was associated with earlier start of when a girl starts her period. And so this is now fairly old, but it's been wonderful to see people kind of pick up and take off with this work, looking at other health outcomes. And so what we found when we did the Greater New York Hair Product Study, where we went all over the New York area, we recruited over 350 individuals. We asked them about different types of hair products that they used based on a set of focus groups and questionnaire development back again in the early 2000s. And what we found, if you could advance the slide, is that there was an increased risk of starting your period prior to age 13 if you used hair oils and hair relaxers or perms. What was interesting was that if we looked at the longer that people use these products and the more frequently that they use these products, it conferred an even earlier or a stronger association. And the association was even stronger when we looked at starting your period prior to age 11. We've redone this analysis and asked these questions in other studies and have found even stronger associations in some studies. So it's worth noting that this finding seems to be somewhat consistent. Next slide, please. The question is what's in these products and whether or not people were using, different racial and ethnic groups were using these products that contained potentially harmful chemicals differently. And so as you probably heard from previous presenters, there's certain ingredients that are on labels and certain ingredients that aren't. In this case, we were using hair product labels, which is essentially going to underestimate what's in the products as far as other potentially harmful chemicals. But what is typically on are things like parabens or placenta or fragrance. And so here, what I'm showing you is, again, in the Greater New York Hair Product Study, about 50% of African American individuals were using products that contained these chemical or other kind of endocrine disrupting ingredients, compared to only about 7% of non-Hispanic white individuals. Next slide, please. So this is the study that I believe you've seen before, and this is just me redoing this table where we shared the list of commonly used hair products with Silent Spring Institute from the Greater New York Hair Product Study, and noted that there are a variety of potentially harmful chemicals in these products. And so this is just a listing of a variety of chemicals. I also just want to note, and this is something I teach in one of our environmental health disparities classes, is that many of these chemicals are less well studied than other chemicals. So fragrances, oftentimes synonymous with a chemical class that we very commonly study. We may not study other chemicals in the same robust way in linking them to health outcomes. So that in and of itself is a systemic racism issue as far as what we choose to study and the questions we choose to ask. Next slide, please. It's also worth noting that in combination, these things that we use on our bodies, we use on our hair, how our scalp is very porous. It is able to intake these chemicals. In combination, they're able to activate different hormonal receptors in our bodies. So the estrogen receptor, which of course we know is involved in breast cancer, androgen receptor, progesterone receptor, and glucocorticoid receptor. And so I'm showing you pluses where it upregulates the activity of those receptors, minuses where it downregulates the activity of those receptors, and the zeros represent where it doesn't have really any activity. So these were commonly used products. And if you look at the rows kind of going across, every single one of these commonly used products had the ability to disrupt or perturb, alter our body's hormonal receptors. So like these are products that we purchase, from right off the shelf, and they have the ability to do that. And that's worrisome. Next slide, please. I just want to note that there are other health outcomes that we have looked at. I'm just showing you data from a pregnancy cohort where we looked at hair product use across pregnancy at multiple visits, hair oil use, hair lotion use, leave-in conditioner use. And if you could advance the slide, please. What I'm highlighting here is that daily use of hair oils in late pregnancy is associated with an 8-day earlier delivery. There are very few things that have that level of clinical relevance. Preterm birth is a condition that Black individuals are much more likely to experience. It's about a 50% increased risk. And so again, here are things that we may be using, again, at the individual level. So that may have impact, particularly in the case of daily use. Next slide, please. It's also worth noting that we looked at birth weight. Again, Black individuals are much more likely to have lower birth weight infants. These are, each of these curves represents a distribution of birth weight. And so what I'm showing you here is people who don't use the products in blue compared to people who use these hair oils less than daily in the red, and then people who use the hair oils on a daily basis. And you don't have to read this really intensely. All I'm going to say here is if you note the green or the daily users have a mean, that means the peak of where that curve is shifted over to the left, meaning lower birth weight. And you see more of the tail or the far left-hand side where the green is sticking outside of the red and the blue, indicating that there's more significantly lower birth weight infants that are born to people who are daily users of hair oils. Could you advance the slide, please? And that confers or translates to use of hair oils being associated with a 300-gram lower birth weight. Again, a clinically relevant difference and has impact and implications for health. That's fine, you can advance, thank you. But what I've really focused on for all of this, and what my career has really been focused on, is looking at the impact of these chemicals and how we may be more exposed to these chemicals and thus have higher concentrations circulating through our bodies, and what impact they've had on our health. And I've been looking at this at the individual level. And our lab had an amazing doctoral student that I mentioned at the beginning, Marissa Chan, who said, you know, I'm really interested in moving beyond the individual. Next slide, please. I'm really interested in thinking about the neighborhood and community level factors and you know, even further up the you know, thinking about structural level factors. And so she developed this conceptual model that if you all you know, kind of look at each of the bins there, it's moving beyond the individual level where we're even thinking about individual use of products or exposure to these chemicals. But looking at the neighborhood and community levels makes us think about what are the racialized beauty standards? What are the things that we say need to, you know, that people, the way people need to show up in the world to be accepted or to get a particular job? And how might targeted marketing influence the products we use? How might there be retailer redlining involved? And how might that limit the access within our neighborhood and communities? And then even thinking further up, you know, thinking about structural factors. Next slide, please. So Marissa launched the Restyle Study, or the Retail Environment and Hairstyling Exposure Study, which really seeks to explore the community and neighborhood level drivers of hair product availability and use, and to understand the community-based intervention possibilities that particularly are here and relevant in the greater Boston area. Next slide, please. So just to kind of highlight, I'm going to focus on one of her aims, the aim 2, which is really understanding how the neighborhood level is impacted by this. But she's also looking at other pieces of this that I'll just really briefly speak to that are qualitative in using a tool called Photo Voice to understand how people in the community understand the facilitators and barriers of safer product access and availability. Next slide, please. So for that, we first started off looking, and this is from a publication in Environmental Health Perspectives, at 8 communities in the Boston area around 2 sociodemographic characteristics: poverty level and race ethnicity, from high to moderate to low for each of those sociodemographic factors. Next slide, please. We used the Environmental Working Group's Skin Deep Hazard Rating Score, where it ranges from 0 to 2 for low, 3 to 6 for moderate, and 7 to 10 for high hazard. So the higher the score, the more harmful ingredients are within the product. Next slide, please. And so these are the results of that study. It also, again, it's presented in the paper, but you can also find this on the Environmental Racism Story Map that we published about a year and a half ago. And what I'm showing you here is Beacon Hill in the Boston area is a wealthy community. It's predominantly white. Mission Hill is a lower income community, it's predominantly a community of color. And so when we're comparing Mission Hill, for example, to Beacon Hill, we find that the risk ratio for having products that are in stores, retail stores that are selling hair products, were more than 2 times as likely to be of high hazard levels. And I'll just say to you, our team that deployed on this went all over the city of Boston. We've now completed all 24 neighborhoods, but again, these are data from the first 8 that were presented in the paper. At the time, 14,000 products were represented here. Marissa's database now is about 39,000 products, where each product was scored. The price point was looked at, and also how the products were used. So the other thing I'm showing you here is that compared to Beacon Hill, communities of color, that includes Roxbury and Mattapan, were more likely to have products that were leave-on products compared to rinse-off products in these yellow bars. So that's the bottom graph here. So again, more likely to contain high-hazard ingredients, and more likely to be products that are left on the hair and scalp, meaning that they have access to enter our bodies and you know, have some impact. Next slide, please. So, you know, beyond that, I think it's really important to do the work that you all are doing here today. So Marissa and the other individual who's also a doctoral student here, Lisa Johnson, we teamed up together and launched a podcast called Beauty Plus Justice. Some of the folks who've spoken here today have been a part of that. And we also launched a number of community engagement events, including do-it-yourself making of products, which is in this other picture over to the side. Next slide, please. For the other components that I mentioned to you, if you go back one slide, please. This photo voice is where our community members have been trained to identify facilitators and barriers and created art that actually reflects what it is like to try to find safer hair care products and what are the concerns that community members may have. Next slide. And so that work was featured at a number of community art shows. And this is an image of Marissa here centered, describing and discussing that work that was done in collaboration with community members as a part of the feedback on how do we identify solutions. Next slide, please. And, with that, I think all of us that are here today doing this type of work really want to seek out opportunities where we can show up and really have accountability that can impact policy change, and not just policy change, but like what retailers are selling, what companies make available. And so that ranges from changes with the Crown Act to making people more aware through articles and various mini documentaries that the Economist has done with the hidden cost of Black hair, to lawsuits that are ongoing, and hopefully what will be the banning and just the beginning of chemicals that are of concern that can really harm us that are found in our products. Next slide. On that note, I will end and I can take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. James Todd. What an eye-opening conversation. Presentation on the neighborhood level differences in hair products and safety. I have often asked, if people know, and the research has been done, that these ingredients are harmful, why are they still allowed? But that's why we're here today, to talk about this in the symposium, to have this conversation and to figure out what are we going to do about it. Now what? All right. Thank you again so much for sharing your expertise with us. I see why you're the GOAT.
This was definitely Marissa Chan. She's a phenomenal, she's a trailblazer in her own right. And I just couldn't be here with us today, but so much of that work is really hers and her asking very innovative questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Dede to see if we can get a couple of questions answered before we wrap up today. But I'm looking forward to week 2 as well. Come on now.
Wow, Pastor Rhonda, why don't you ask the question that you posed right after Alicia's presentation, and then let's have Alicia respond to that. And then we can bring Dr. Tamara James Todd and ask a few of the questions that came up during her presentation. Would that work?
That'll work.
Let's do that.
So since many Black women, including myself, have been using these products year after year after year, what steps can we take now that we know, to minimize the long-term effects of the exposure on our?
I always like to tell people when I'm asked this question, please don't think you have to do a complete overhaul and take everything out, throw everything away, and get rid of all your products and candles and your house. You want to start small. You want to just think about the things that you have at home that you're never gonna use again. You just keep it with the hopes of maybe one day, So for instance, I started with my perfumes. I used to have so many, and now I don't have as many. Maybe I think it's 3 in there now, but I know that most of those. They don't even they have no idea what's in those. And so getting rid of, I started there, and then switching over to makeup. Those were easy steps for me, because things like lotions and skincare products are a little bit harder for me to get rid of because of my daily routine. So I say start with the things that are easiest for you to make some exchanges and changes with, and then transition into what's harder. So now I think I've simplified my skincare routine and makeup routine, and even intimate care routine, things like that. So just start small and, be more intentional. And if you're here today, share this with your families and friends, and y'all, as you continue to have this conversation with others, you'll find out other things that you can slowly transition away from and get out of your routine. So again, and then another easy swap for me was related to menstrual and intimate care products, getting rid of the things that weren't necessary for my menstrual and intimate care health, and swapping out into menstrual products that are perceived as probably not the best, like the scents, getting rid of the unnecessary scents. So again, simplifying everything.
Well, that sure helped a lot. Little by little. Because I tell you, I have a cabinet full of things. But when we do spring cleaning, this is a good thing to keep in mind when we start getting rid of stuff. Especially if we're not using it. Let it go. Let it go. Dr. Dede, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pastor Rhonda. Yes, let it go if you can. So just to kind of summarize a little bit, thank you, Dr. Alicia, for that response. So start small, but start somewhere is what we're encouraging you all to do. Use less if you can. If you can't right now, nobody's judging you. We just want you to get started in whichever way that you feel comfortable, and then share this information with other people. So there are a number of resources on our resource page right here on the BCI Bench to Community Initiative site, where if you click on resources, so just like someone says in the chat, 𝗥𝗲𝘀𝗲 is an app that you can download. 𝗥𝘀𝘀𝗲 is another one. So we actually have Amit that will be joining us for day 3 of this symposium to share all things 𝗥𝘀𝘀𝗲 EWG, as from Dr. Tamara James Todd's presentation. We'll also give you more information about what's in your personal care products, cleaning products, etc. But we just want you to start somewhere, use less if you can, and then share this information with somebody else. So that means you got to come back for day 2, because there were a number of policy-related questions, I believe, from Dr. Tamara James Todd's presentation. And if you don't mind, Tamara, I'm going to ask you one of those questions so that you can kind of give us a T-ball for what's coming up for day 2. So while the information you presented here speaks, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. One is, a lot of what you presented speaks to the importance of moving beyond just the individual and their voices to, while that's important, we also have to consider these societal decisions, particularly around systemic racism. So what are some of the ways that we as individuals that have been consuming this information for this day continue to make changes about the products that were sold in different neighborhoods from a policy perspective? Can you kind of give us some tidbits related to that, and that'll kind of tee up for day 2 that's coming up next week?
Haha. You would think I would know by now, but here we are. So I'm gonna actually give a little bit of an answer to that question that may be a little unorthodox, because I think oftentimes when we talk policy, we think at the national level, and we rarely think what are the local or regional things that we might be able to do that can help push national policy change. So I'm going to give an example, like a personal example. I went to Target, this is maybe a year or so ago, and there's a natural hair product that I use that I noticed was not on the shelves. And this is Target, it's big, big box store. But I went over and I got, like, again, in the spirit of Marissa having gone out with our research team and collecting 14,000 products, I was like, I wonder what would happen if we ask retailers to sell products that we are looking for that are safer. What would happen if we did that? So I went over to the folks who were, stacking the shelves, and I said, have you thought about this? And they didn't know what I was talking about. Like, this is not a product that they use. And I said, do you mind if I speak to your manager, like, or whoever orders your products? I'm just curious, it was more of an experiment because that's what my scientist brain does. But it worked. Like, they started selling the product. And I mean, it's not always there. It comes and goes, but it's there a good chunk of the time. And so being able to work with your local retailers to see if they would be willing to, sell safer products is a step in the direction. That's not, the big policy. Of course, we want the big policy change, but we right now have some challenges in getting policy, anything done. So like, how do we start where we are now? But thinking also about the state level. Thank you, California, for leading the charge in so many different ways. So being able to lean into state level changes that can really help facilitate, again, companies aren't going to make, a product for California or for Massachusetts and something else for the rest of the US. It's just not going to happen. So those types of, being able to engage with our state officials around some of these policy changes is really key. And then there's champions at the federal level, right? Representatives who are really passionate, who are trying to make change, that I think being unafraid to write, to call, to get in touch with those folks. I do think, to what Dr. Alicia said about influencers, the power of influencers, right? Like leaning into that. So there's so many different ways. This is just a few, but I think there's a variety of ways that we could do that as individuals.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that response. There are a few questions that I think I'm going to save for day 2, if people don't mind, that are specifically focused on policy. But to close us out, we are almost done, and I just have some closing remarks after that. I do want to ask you, Dr. Tamara James-Todd, because you've been in this game for so many years, I'm not going to age you, but how many years have you been doing this work?
So wrong. I did say at the beginning of this, I started like that whole thing in 2000. So here we are.
There you go, 2000s, right? So she not new to this, she true to this. So she's been doing this for a while. So while we have you, a question that I have for you is, because you've been doing this work for such a long time, if you had a magic wand for what you want to see for the next 5 to 10 years, where do you want to see this beauty justice movement go? Like, if you can create whatever, where would you like to see this go?
So first of all, can I just say, it is exciting. When I started doing this work, I got laughed at a lot. Like, people didn't know what I was talking about, and so on. So a part of what I want to continue to see is excitement and energy around, doing this science. It brings me joy to see you, Dr. Today, and you, Dr. Alicia, and so many others really doing this work, asking phenomenal questions. It is not, I think sometimes we get into a space where we feel like we have sharp elbows. This is not a sharp elbow space. This is a let's get it done. Let's get in here and do it together, because we are so much more powerful together than we are apart. So I want to continue to see, scientists of, whatever background, but particularly there's a unique perspective of people that use these products, use are going to ask these questions in very unique ways because it is our personal experience and it's where it's married with our scientific expertise that I think is really that intersection is its own version of innovation that I'm excited to see. So I'm hoping that what that's going to do is bring us to a place where we can make change that's even broader than this little niche of hair products, where like as a whole, we're able to say, look, consumer products cannot just willy-nilly contain harmful chemicals. And that this case actually helps to propel us into a space where we are much more intentional about creating safer products for everyone.
Can I say amen? I'm just gonna say amen. That was the whole sermon. I think Pastor Ron, that was the sermon. Thank you so much again, not just to Dr. Tamara James Todd, but to all of the speakers from day one. That's it, folks. That's all we got for you for today. But this is just day one of the symposium. We want you to come back next Tuesday for day two, where it's covering all things policy related. And we have some surprises for you related to day two that you got to come back to check it out. And then day three is all about what can I do as an individual to make change for myself and then also for my community. So we are going large to small, and we want you all to come back for it all. So while I go over some closing remarks and credits, I want you all to, I have homework, but you have to do the homework right now. Put into the chat and let me know, what did you learn from today? Just one thing. Don't give me a dissertation, but just one thing that you learned from all of our speakers today. What are you walking away from that you are going to share with somebody in your circle, in your immediate circle? Or even if you want to jump onto Facebook or the TikTok or the Instagram, whatever, what are you going to share with people from day one? So while y'all are doing that, a few reminders for everyone. Please register for day two and come back and join us for the advocacy space on day two of next Tuesday. If you are attending today, I want you to please fill out the evaluation. It helps us improve the programs that we're bringing to you all. And then it also helps us to obtain funding for future programs. So we've been fortunate to have the California Breast Cancer Research Program fund this year's symposium. We got to give them proof of concept that folks want this information, and your evaluations will help us do that. And then lastly, for those that are wanting continuing education credits from NCHEC, you will need to fill out the evaluations. Please be sure to include your ID numbers into the evaluation. And that's it. We will take it from there and we'll send you a certificate. All right. So that gave y'all enough time to come up with something to tell me in the chat what you learned from today. I hope it's so. I'm just going to read a few of them off. Some folks are excited. I love the excitement. You guys are warming my heart. This was an amazing session. Looking forward to it. Great job to all the speakers and everyone who helped plan it, just so giving folks their flowers. Awesome presentation from all the speakers. Miss Phyllis Clark joined us in the chat. If you guys missed my flowers to her, it was because of her, Miss Dora Mitchell and Dr. Susanna Montgomery, that I'm even here today. So just giving the Black women in our lives their flowers while they're still with us, to really look at the products that I use on my body. I think y'all got the point. So you all can now go out and educate somebody else related to this topic area. So with that said, thank you, Pastor Rhonda from Celebrate Life Cancer Ministries, for being a wonderful host and moderator for today. Tia Tomlin Harris, Dr. Jasmine Tapia, Dr. Ashley, Dr. Zeynep, Dr. Alicia, Dr. Tamara James Todd for being our amazing speakers. Just want to give us some shout outs to our production team, Ebony Andrews, who was executive producer from the Ebony Experience. I've known this girl for over 15 years from Morehouse School of Medicine. She's my sister from another mother and a different mister. So Joel also from Stream-Bite Media. Thank you so much. Lori, who did our graphic design. Carmen, who's one of our associate producers for the Abigail Lopez, who has been in the chat with y'all, engaging, and also on our social media. So many people to thank, but I also just want to thank all of you all for being here today. So with that said, blessings to you all. God bless. Thank you for showing up to day 1, and we'll see you all next week for day 2 of the Black Beauty Breakdown. Bye, everybody.